Right. Thank you very much, Sheila. I would like to start off by just adding my voice to those paying tribute to Kevin Zeese, who was a brilliant activist and a popular educator, and he leaves a valuable legacy that I think will continue to be very widely treasured throughout the world. So my name is Carlos Martinez. I'm convener of an international campaign called No Cold War, which was set up earlier this year in response to the very dangerous deterioration in US-China relations. So far in 2020, we've seen the trade war escalating and heard ever louder calls for so-called decoupling from some senior figures in the United States. The Trump regime has persistently tried to blame China for the US's shameful and frankly horrifying mismanagement of the pandemic. Mike Pompeo is touring the world, trying to persuade US allies to shut Huawei out of their network infrastructure. The propaganda around Hong Kong and Xinjiang has reached, frankly, hysterical levels. And currently we have the attack on TikTok and WeChat and a rising hostility towards Chinese investment, Chinese technology, and indeed Chinese people. And that's combined with an ongoing effort to encircle China militarily with ever more frequent US naval operations in the South China Sea, increased weapons sales to Taiwan, encouraging Japan's rearmament, which is very explicitly aimed at containing China, deployment of the THAAD anti-ballistic missile defense system in South Korea and Guam, the establishment of a marine base in the north of Australia, and so on. So all of this increasingly looks like a new Cold War. And I think it's useful to just delve briefly into what a Cold War is. So the original Cold War, in which the US and the Soviet Union were the main protagonists, had different meanings for the different participants. Actually, the Soviets didn't use the expression Cold War. They didn't see it as a battle between superpowers. They considered that they were defending their right and the right of other countries to pursue a model of development other than the one prescribed by the US. That is, a model that wasn't directly aimed at producing economic and political benefit for US-led Western capitalism. And that's why the Soviet Union's allies during that period included, for example, the people of Vietnam fighting against imperialist domination, the people of Korea fighting against imperialist domination, the people of South Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Guinea-Bissau, Algeria, fighting against colonialism, fighting against apartheid, the people of Cuba, of Grenada, of Chile, fighting for their right to construct socialist societies. Whereas the US and its allies fought a very different kind of Cold War. Indeed, you could say that the US was fighting for the opposite of what the Soviet Union was fighting for. If the Soviets and their allies were fighting for different countries' rights to develop on their own terms and according to their own plans, the US and its allies were fighting precisely to prevent that. And this was verbalized very clearly by President Truman in 1947, when he said that we can survive only if the whole world adopts the American system. So in Cold War thinking, there's no question of multipolarity. There's no question of one world, many systems. There's no concept of development and emergence outside of a system of imperialism. Now, the US and its allies ultimately won the Cold War in the sense that the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, nor do the other European socialist countries. And it's no accident that this period from the beginning of the 1990s coincided with the high tide of neoliberalism, the domination of the US-led financial institutions. This was the era of structural adjustment programs, of privatization, of deregulation, of economic globalization that was specifically on the US's terms. And although the end of the Cold War was supposed to bring peace and harmony, after all, it was called the end of history, it actually brought forth a period of intense military aggression in which the US and its allies launched major wars against Iraq, against Yugoslavia, against Afghanistan, against Libya. But particularly with the rise of China, that post-Cold War era, that high tide of US hegemony is coming to an end. China is at a stage where it has to be recognized as a global power in its own right. It's the world's largest trading nation. It's the second biggest economy. Furthermore, it's increasingly no longer just a cheap manufacturing base. It's emerging as a science and technology powerhouse in its own right. Meanwhile, At the diplomatic level, it's increasingly willing to speak out at the UN and other forums against hegemony, for example, using its veto multiple times in the UN Security Council against military action against Syria. And there are a few Chinese concepts that are causing real concern for those in the US that dedicate themselves to the so-called Project for a New American Century. One of these is the Belt and Road Initiative, with China working with 130 countries worldwide on infrastructure projects. Another is the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Another is the Chinese government's Made in China 2025 roadmap, which outlines a path towards comprehensive industrial upgrade, towards China becoming one of the leaders of the global economy. And taken together, these constitute actually no threat whatsoever to ordinary people in the United States or elsewhere in the West, but they do constitute a huge threat to US domination. And that's why a large part of the US ruling class now is pushing a new Cold War agenda at this point in time. We should be absolutely 100% clear that a new Cold War is potentially disastrous for humanity. It will reduce global cooperation in an era where we desperately need more global cooperation to tackle global challenges. Climate change, pandemics, microbial resistance, ending wars, ending poverty. These are urgent and massive problems that can only be solved at a global level. So we need to continue working to build the broadest possible range of forces against Cold War and for peace and for cooperation. On behalf of the No Cold War campaign, I would like to thank Pivot to Peace for the excellent work that you've been doing, and I hope that we can continue to build together. Thank you.